but we do have to keep trying. Sometimes in our discourse, we find ourselves, I think, talking past each other. We think we're communicating with each other. Left is talking to right, and right is talking to left. We think we're debating a particular issue or controversy. But in reality, I think often we're not. What we think we're debating, they're debating something else. We have trouble communicating. I think often what we think we're the surface issue that we're debating isn't really what the real issue, the real difference between us is. Often it's something much more fundamental, something more human. We often don't understand what that is. I think the perfect example of that is what seems like what ought to be a rather technical issue: global warming. We all know the facts. The facts are that last year, 2010, was tied with 2005 as the warmest year on record. The facts are 9 of the 10 warmest years on record have occurred since 2001. Last year was the wettest year on record. All those are consistent with global warming. The climate is acting just as the climate models have predicted it would act. But as we know, facts like that don't seem to carry much weight in this country. We can see climate change coming. We can see it happening. Earlier spring, later fall, when plants bloom, when birds arrive and when birds leave. You can see it happening around us. Yet legislation to address climate change is dead in Congress. It's going nowhere. The issue is deadlocked. And while I worry a lot about what's going on in Congress regarding our nation's finances, I think our refusal to address climate change has far more profound and long-standing consequences than what our national debt is. I think what we're doing is unforgivable, but I frankly don't know what to do about it. I am at a loss. My instinct as a journalist is to press ahead with the facts, to continue having the argument on those grounds. But I confess to a very real fear that that's a fruitless approach, that we're just, as a society, going to do as a species, going to do a Thelma and Louise right off the edge of the cliff, because we don't show any ability to change course. The problem is that when we debate global warming here in America, we don't debate concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere or the thickness of Arctic ice. That's not how we do things in 21st century America. Because to many of our fellow Americans, global warming is not really a scientific issue. It's an issue of cultural allegiance. It's a tribal marker. It's how we can divide us from them. And because of that, it can never be resolved. You can never have a compromise. In the conservative press, in the talk radio world, in the Republican caucus in Congress, global warming is dismissed as a conspiracy among scientists and liberals to undermine the foundations of capitalism. They sincerely believe that it is a hoax, a swindle, a fraud. So while we want to talk about scientific data, they respond by saying, well, the data are all made up. That becomes that you can't continue the conversation when that is how the two sides are talking past each other. It's kind of funny. I mean, I know scientists. I used to cover science and technology for the paper. And the truth is that while scientists are very smart people, they have trouble getting organized for a two-person lunch. The idea that they're capable of organizing and sustaining a conspiracy on a global scale and doing it for money is more crazy than it sounds, and it sounds very crazy. But the problem is that yet even conservative politicians who know better, Newt Gingrich, John McCain, Mike Huckabee, all of whom have said in the past they have acknowledged the reality of man-made global climate change. They have now all recanted. that signed up with the conspiracy mongers. They know very well what the data said, but they also know which side their tribe is on. And they have decided to side with their tribe. So it makes you wonder, you're trying to figure this out, where does a nonsensical theory like that come from? What drives people to believe the frankly unbelievable? I think our president, the reaction to our president, offers another example. By any rational measure, he is the quintessential American. He's a loyal husband, a loving father. He's a one-man melting pot, a man who made it to the highest leadership post on the planet on his own merit and his own hard work. Even if you disagree with his politics, you have to embrace him as a figure that really only the United States could produce. And yet, in the eyes of many, that is not who he is. He is a Kenyan, Marxist, anti-colonialist. He couldn't be more alien to America if he'd come down here and landed in a spaceship. Everything he does, from health care to the economic stimulus to his policy toward Egypt, is interpreted through that viewpoint. It's an irrational viewpoint, it's destructive, but it is real. Just this week, you had another example. President Obama went to the Chamber of Commerce to speak to the captains of industry. And he talked there about all the things that government was trying to do to make business more profitable, modernizing our infrastructure, trying to educate our children better, negotiate free trade deals, all these things. And in return, he asked our business leaders to think of ways they could hire more American workers. He told them, the benefits can't just translate into greater profits and bonuses for those at the top. They have to be shared by American workers. And it was amazing to see what happened next. In the conservative blogosphere, the story went out. Obama says profits have to be shared by American workers. He's a socialist. He's a Marxist. We knew it all along. It's astounding to me that how did it become un-American for an American president to go before American businessmen and ask them to hire American workers? How did that stop being patriotic and become Marxist? It did not. But somehow that is a perspective that people are taking. In a related, similar fashion, you hear a lot about how the federal government is growing larger and larger, it's taking over more and more of the economy. It is a leviathan eating away at our seed corn. And it's somehow driving us to this socialist nirvana in which everybody has the same income, and everybody's equal in income, and that's supposedly Obama's vision of America. And the fact is, none of that is true. Every single trend that I mentioned is actually going in exactly the opposite direction. The government is not getting bigger. Today, the federal government consumes less of our gross domestic product than it did in the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was president. We have the same number of federal employees today as we did in the early 50s. And the population was about half the size it is today. This whole idea that the rich are being persecuted. Back in the 50s, when was when America was really America. The top marginal tax rate was 90%. Today it's 35%. But somehow we're persecuting America's rich today. In fact, the concentration of wealth among the richest folks in the United States is greater than it is in Egypt. And you saw what happened in Egypt. I think, however, one of the most disturbing of the trends is the animosity and the bigotry directed at those who follow the religion of Islam. We were here 9 years ago because of the attacks on 9/11. That's what started us in this direction. Bobby was mentioning, I think, that this bookends 9/11. And I wish that were true, but I don't think, it definitely starts a new chapter, but I don't think that story is not ended, but not by any means. But we have a crazy man on Fox News named Glenn Beck, who's on air on the nation's most popular cable news channel, telling people that Obama is part of a secret Muslim plot to reestablish the caliphate.
Reestablish what?
The caliphate. The caliphate was the back in, I think, around 1000. The Muslim world, the Ottoman Empire, based in Turkey, Iran, Spain, all the Arab world, Turkey, up into Bosnia, the caliphate, and the concept of Glenn Beck and others is that Obama is an agent of some sort who hopes to reestablish the caliphate worldwide. And he's on nationwide TV every day telling millions of people this, and they believe it. In the Georgia legislature. In the Georgia legislature, they now have bills have been introduced that are probably going to get at least some attention. They're going to pass a bill that says foreign law can't be imposed in the United States. By doing so, it would violate the Constitution. They think you have to pass a law so that foreign law can't supersede the U.S. Constitution. They think a law is going to do this that the Constitution can't. It sounds too crazy to believe, but it is actually true. The country is going crazy in many ways. Now, as you all know, I disagreed with a lot of things, many things, most things that President Bush did. But I think he deserves and earns our respect, at least in that regard. He stressed that we were not at war with Islam. We were not at war with Muslims. That it was important not to think of it in those terms. Since he's left the scene, there's no voice like that in the Republican Party anymore. And we miss it. We miss that leadership coming out of that side of the aisle. So where's all this coming from? Again, I keep trying to figure out where do crazy ideas bubble up from, and then how do they spread so wildly? Psychology has a lot to do with it. 160 years ago, a man by the name of Charles Mackay observed that men think in herds, and they go mad in herds. And that is clearly true. We are seeing that happen. The classic example which Mackay used was that of men going mad in herds was the great tulip bulb mania of 1637. Now, those of you who know your economic history may remember that story. People began to invest in tulip bulbs. They were pretty. People wanted them. And the more people invested in them, the higher the price rose. And the higher the price, the more people invested. Beginning to sound familiar? In time, the price of a single tulip bulb rose to exceed that 10 times the average person's income. And then, of course, it all collapsed. The whole Dutch economy collapsed because of the tulip mania. So I guess if people can get caught up in irrational enthusiasm for tulip bulbs, it becomes a little easier to understand what has happened with Sarah Palin. She's just a bulb of a different sort. Palin is a creature, a creation of Fox News.
All right.
And that brings me to my next point.